Hello and welcome to MZ Webinars. We're really excited today to be joined by Ben Owen, who is MZ's Director of FE, and Karen Turley from South Staffordshire College. So Karen's going to be sharing some really interesting stuff with us about how the college are implementing a lot of MZ data, but you'll hear more about that in a second. If you have any questions during the course of the webinar, please put them in the questions box on your control panel, and we will endeavour to get to those at the end of the presentation. We will be sharing the recording and slides from today in a follow-up email, so please keep your eyes open for that. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Ben. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you very much. And hi, Karen. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
Good afternoon, everyone. So thank you for joining us for the next in our webinar series, where obviously we're showcasing all the best practice in the sector, particularly obviously around the use of LMI. And I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Karen today, Assistant Principal for Curriculum and Quality at South Staffordshire College, an account that I know well. You know, I support the college and some really fantastic practice. So we're going to hear from Karen very shortly. Around all the good use of LMI and wider data that the college use in curriculum planning and alignment. Just before we start on that, just a quick sort of update from all things MZ Burning Glass. So we are very shortly be launching a new product available to existing and to new customers, which is our Curriculum Insight tool. So this is a series of dashboards that we've developed out of our Italian data team that are based out of Milan, and it really goes off the DFE data set, which, you know, existing customers will know. We've had the DFE data set in FE Analyst Curriculum Overview for just over a year now, and obviously based upon feedback, you know, from people last year around wanting tools where they're quite easy to get the data out and get insight out of the system. We've spent a bit of time working with our colleagues in Milan to develop a series of dashboards, and ultimately these are available as an add-on for your existing subscription, and they're also available to subscribe for non-users as a potential entry into the use of the world of LMI. The three sort of areas we look at, there is 4 dashboards, but the 3 areas we're looking at is local economy overview, which gives you an idea of what's happening within a LEP area, including, like, you know, industry composition, top jobs, recruitment demand, and who are the major employers. We've then got the supply and demand data, so we can look at that within a LEP area, so we can start to have a look at all providers within that FE data set. What does that supply and demand look like by SSA 1? And then the next dashboard down allows you to look at you as an individual provider, how you fit into that piece. And then the final dashboard that we've developed is subject area analysis. And that allows you to look at things at SSA 1. So you can have a look, for example, at health, social care, public services, and you can start to think about, you know, what are the key employers, what are the key skills, ultimately how does your offer fit into that, what's your market share, etc. So if you're interested in that, obviously you can reach out to myself and Carla as usual. So that's the little bit of an update from everything MZ Burning Glass. So I'm delighted now to hand over to Karen. So Karen, thank you for joining us, and we'll start your presentation if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great, thanks Ben. So as Ben has already mentioned earlier, he'd spoken to me. I've been working with Ben for a couple of years now, and he'd approached me and asked me if I'd share what we do on the network at South Staffordshire College. So just for the next slide, please, Ben, just as a bit of an overview, first of all, to understand who we are and what we need to service. So South Staffordshire College is a medium-sized GFE. We operate across 5 sites, and we operate in 14 of the 15 SSAs. So quite a varied and wide curriculum offer. More recently, in November, we had our full Ofsted inspection and secured our good outcome. And as part of that, we were proud of some of the work we do around curriculum planning. It's one of the other reasons I think Ben had asked us to speak about what we do, really. So getting on to what we do, please, Ben. So first of all, like other FE colleges, and you would expect, we are a careers, not courses college, but I think to bring that to life, MZ really allows us to do that. It's easy to just talk into the slogan without actually looking at what are the careers and what is the demand and can we help learners fulfil them. So I think the first thing that we always do is start early, but even now not early enough, and I'm bringing that forward. So we start every September and we look at our full-time curriculum offer for the following September. We validate that offer in the first 4 weeks. So by October half term, we have our new full-time student guide ready. The reason we do that is notoriously in previous years, we've gone into curriculum planning in October, November time, and by the time we've approved it and got it out into the guide, it's January or February. Staff aren't aware of the offer, and of course you don't then recruit. So we've continued to pull that forward, and actually we're looking at doing that this year in June for September 2023. In terms of EMSI and how we start that with the college is we have a full 2-day review. It then continues, but that gives us a bit of a launch and an intense period to start to understand the data. So the first thing that we do is we arrange a series of meetings with Ben. So each director and each curriculum manager, so for example in construction, and myself would join Ben in a 1.5 hour slot, and we'd have a look at what's happening in that sector. We'd also obviously from Ben get any refreshers on what's changed on the system and what we can use it and what's more effective. And that really launches us into the next 4-6 week period where we use the platform really intensely. I started using EMSI about 3 or 4 years ago now, and I remember feeling very overwhelmed by the product when I first looked at it. I was a little bit scared of it. So we'd started using it as a college and we'd use it in curriculum planning, but what we were finding is people presenting very different sets of data, very different parameters, turning out very different things. So as a college a couple of years ago, we decided that we wanted to set quite clear parameters around what we wanted them to look at in EMSI and what we wanted them to get out of it, and therefore what we'd use as part of curriculum planning. So the first thing that I did is looked at creating a template for the entire college, which went through the range of areas on EMSI we wanted them to use, and also set some clear parameters around it, which I'll share with you as an example after. As you'd expect, we make sure that curriculum plans are approved by December. We forecast in January, and we've just very nearly finished timetabling. So we have a few timetables left to go, and they'll be complete by March. But on top of that, we do constantly every month use EMSI to look at the adult in-year job demand, because we feel that's where the product really comes to life with what's out there and what's happening at that given time. If we just go on to the next slide, please, Ben. So in terms of curriculum planning, these are kind of our top 3 tips, really, the top 3 sections we use, and I'll explain how we use them. The first thing that we do is we look at the curriculum overview, and that gives us a very quick overview of what's happening in the sector. So what is the job demand, where is the growth coming from? Particularly we look at that point, we look at the market share, and then we dig down, if we haven't got the market share, into who has got that market share and how can we get more of that as well. So that's our first headline, really. We then go on to where we start to look at the detail within the course design section of EMSI, and we review several things in there. We mainly focus obviously now on the vacancies and the top occupations. On top of that, and I'll explain a little bit more about it later on, we look at the hard and common skills, and that's what we use to design our curriculum. And then the third thing that we use quite intensely is the jobs and skills demand. This is looking at a live report, so we often reduce the filter and the time frame when we look at job skills and demand, because we want to see what's happening here and now. This is things like sector-based academies, short adult offers, and what can we respond to and put on in 2 or 3 weeks' time. And then as part of that, we also look at top employer vacancies. We also use this to approach new employers. So as a college, obviously becoming more and more important is employer engagement and input. So I set the task to all of my curriculum managers to identify 2 of the employers from the list we're not currently working with and set about building a relationship, whether that's sitting on our employer engagement boards, feeding into curriculum, whether they may take work experience, whether we can service them with sector-based academies or upskilling for their staff. So they're the 3 main sections that we use, and I'll give you an insight and an example of how in a minute. And then finally, we look at all that, and we also look at what the LEP's telling us and what our local priorities are telling us, and bring all of those elements together, because any one of them in isolation doesn't necessarily result in putting on the right curriculum. So if we move into the next slide. Apologies, I've had a terrible cold. trying not to give into the coughing at this stage. So the first slide I've mentioned earlier was around my master template that I set up for curriculum. This is an example of one of the first slides that are in there as guidance for curriculum managers. So they have their training with Ben, I run through what I'm looking for, and then they complete this and present it back to us. The first one being curriculum overview. Few filters that I choose to apply for our college that we think work well. Firstly, by delivery location, because we think it's important to make sure we're picking the right areas. So as a standard for the college, I select Cannock, Lichfield, Staffordshire, Tamworth and Stafford, because that's our natural catchment area. And by default, that's what I expect curriculum managers to use to reveal the data. There are some areas where they can widen the scope, but they do have to explain why they've widened the scope and where they've widened it to. So for example, at Rodbaston, we have our land-based area, which does pull learners in from across the whole of the West Midlands, because we offer transport and it's quite a niche provision, so they can change those parameters. We then choose to look at the same learner locations. And then we also look at a time frame of a couple of years behind us and the next 2 to 3 years in front of us. So what that allows us to do is look at the pattern of growth, where it's come from and where it's going to. Just as a reminder for my team, they often forget to select achievements at the top and look at enrolments instead. So I kind of put hints and tips in there for them so they don't forget to apply the right filters. And at this stage, we do look at both classes of worker, both employed and self-employed at the early stage. As we move on to different sets of curriculum, we may filter those in or out. And then finally, we get them to display that headline table that you get from curriculum overview. So I think on the next slide, it'll give you an example. So what my curriculum managers would do is then talk us through how many learners have we had on that, how is our subject achievement, is it higher or lower? So in this example, obviously construction are doing well. We have 60% of the market share. So what we would do then as part of that is they would also present where we're losing the market to and where we're going to try and increase our market growth as well. We then obviously have a look at whether we're flooding the market or whether there's still room in that market. What we don't want to do is just put on programmes and careers where actually there aren't jobs for learners to go into. So we keep our eye on that as well. And then as well as looking at things like what is the wage and what is the growth for that area, and should we still be putting on that curriculum. That's very top level, and that starts our discussions. We then move into course design. As part of course design, we look at 2 or 3 different parts of that element. We start with having a look at, within our areas, what is the job growth and how does that compare to the national demand? And again, are we setting them up for the right careers and jobs, and what is that change? And then obviously we get into looking at the list of what are those occupations. From there, we start looking at the top 10 jobs, which is on the next slide, Ben. So when we're looking at this, obviously we start to map curriculum and start to look at our courses. So in this example, you can see CSCS labourers, as you'd probably expect in this area, are at the top of that list for job demand. But one of the programmes that we put on as a result of this was a jump start into construction, where we put on a short adult offer, which included them gaining their CSCS card, as well as doing some health and safety and some basic employability skills. But then we'll also look at this list for our full-time study programme learners to make sure we're putting the right modules and units into those full-time study programmes, or we're putting on particularly the right pathways and starting to look at the weighting of jobs. This is also the section where we would look, start to have a look at who is employing people as well. And then from there, we look at the hard skills, which is the next slide. So as part of the hard skills, many of them you would expect to see in the list, but sometimes it does churn out some things that actually makes you stop and think. So for example, looking at public liability and asking ourselves within the study programme, do we do enough on that, or are we just concentrating on the trade skills? So we use this to have a look at both what do we need to put into our current programmes and pathways, and actually are we short of courses to lead into these careers? So obviously after we've reviewed this, what the staff do then is present to us what courses they want to put on as a result of it, or what courses they want to change and why as a result of it. We then also look at common skills. We use common skills both in the core curriculum but actually as a wider college. So in this example, I'd ask construction what they were going to do to make sure we were churning out these common skills, and particularly thinking about something like customer service, which they wouldn't be doing every day when they were laying bricks, and they might be a fantastic bricklayer, but if they haven't got really good customer service skills, they're not going to go out and get a self-employed job. So as the result of this particular one, we looked at putting on a project in the Careers Week for all of our construction learners, where they're going to be taking part in a brief led by employers and externals. They're going to get their brief, and then they're going to have to engage with that employer or that role play activity to both increase communication and look at customer services, following obviously some training we would have done with them. On top of that, you'll start to see some very common themes coming out of all areas. For example, communication and digital skills. So what we do there is look at mapping that back into our tutorial programme for the entire college, to look at the employability skills for our learners and what modules we may need to put in or take out. So coming on to the next slide. The third main section that we use in MZ is around looking at the jobs and skills demand. And we use that, as I said earlier, really to focus more on our adult provision and to focus on what's happening in year. So for example, on that filter, we reduce it down to 12 months because we want to know what's happening now and how we can set people to go into jobs tomorrow, next week, in 3 or 4 weeks' time. So we use all this information in MZ, and then what we get the curriculum managers to do is interpret that information and put forward their plan based on what it's telling us. So we were quite successful in a couple of our recent let bids using the information from MZ. So one of which was a motion capture studio with the GBS LEP at our Creative Arts campus in Lichfield, because we saw that there were a need for that, and similar with our digital hubs, where we secured £500,000 worth of investment. When we're writing those bids and we're going after bids, we do use MZ to look at the amount of jobs in the region, to look at the skills, how the equipment is needed to align them to those skills and jobs. So I think as a short overview, that's some of the main ways that we use MZ to help support the planning of our curriculum.
Perfect. I mean, thank you, Karen. I'll just stop sharing so we put the slide back. So thank you for that, Karen. We had one question from a delegate that wanted to know, do you provide, do we look at a report for every curriculum area, or is there like a general overview covering main themes, or is it a combination of both?
No, we do look at it by every single curriculum area. So we don't find really, when you start pulling together several curriculum areas, the data doesn't start telling you much. So for the curriculum overview, we do start with the whole of the SSA, but then we do drop that down into the second tier of SSAs. So in construction, we'd start pulling out plumbing separately to bricklaying. In, for example, health and social care, we'd pull out SSA 1 and look at public services separately to early years and health and social care. The curriculum managers would look at each of those tables and data sets and have to use them for each of the relevant areas.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. That's really good to hear. Quite a thorough process. A follow-on question actually is how easy has it been for you to get buy-in, which I suppose is always the $64,000 question when it comes to data and software. And how easy has it been to get buy-in across obviously curriculum, and how easy have you found it in terms of being used as a method to change or develop curriculum? I think the delegates finding some barriers perhaps in their organisation.
I suppose initially it is quite, as I say, an overwhelming platform, and it can be quite intense. I think as a college, the reason we've got buy-in, or we've certainly promoted buy-in, is they know if they come to me with any requests for anything, the first thing I'm going to do is ask them about the data, whether that's MZ, whether that's teaching and learning data, is what is their evidence really? Why do they think we need to put that on? So they've got into a habit of, if they want to recruit a new member of staff, or if they want to put in a capital bid, that if we haven't got the information to support the evidence for that, then obviously they get a decline. So I suppose at first it was gradual, but now actually they get quite excited about using the data and identifying new things. I do think the intense period at the start of the academic year helps, so everyone knows for those two 2 full days that we identify. Everyone's spending 2 full days really getting underneath the start of launch of curriculum planning, because I think if you don't put aside some time, it's easy not to find time for it. As a college as well, we also dedicate every Friday to curriculum planning. So whether that's we're looking at recruitment numbers, or we're looking at our marketing, or we're looking at what new courses we're putting on, we've set aside that day, if you like, to focus on curriculum. It's quite easy to get tied up into quality and making sure the quality of provision, which is very important. Obviously, I look after both, but it's easy to get tied up just with the quality of what we're doing, as opposed to what's new, what's out there, and what can we change, and how can we grow, and how can we keep up with the market, and make sure we are preparing learners for careers that are going to be there in 2 years' time, as opposed to careers that are outdated today.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, really telling point. And I think the next question come through, and the question was around, does this take a lot of time? Do you have a team helping you to create this data? I mean, I can speak from an EMSI perspective in that obviously it is the curriculum teams that are producing this, aren't they, through the training, etc.
It is, yeah. We don't have any extra staff, so obviously myself, it does probably take a few hours to initially create that master template and reflect and think about what do we want to look at. But you know, I think half a day in the summer to have a think about what we want to do and how we want to apply it, and then it is the curriculum managers that take that forward for each of their own areas. So you know, generally in the first few weeks they would maybe spend a couple of hours a week on the tool, but we think that's quite important. And then obviously as we approach Christmas, we're just looking at it for in-year adult job demand, so it's not, you know, it doesn't take as long. But equally, when we first used EMSI a few years ago, and we weren't using it probably as intensely, even if you go on EMSI and just do half a day for the entire year, you're going to learn things like that you didn't know before, or you're going to consolidate and get support for SLT and ELT buying for things like capital bids or recruiting new members of staff.
Absolutely, I think it's a really good point, and I think it certainly comes across from me, and like I said, I'm slightly biased because obviously I work with you and the team, but obviously it does help, I think, having that sort of very clear vision, that very clear ownership and expectation. There was another question that was asked around, they're assuming obviously you use this for apprenticeships as well as study programme and adult skills in terms of the skills data, etc. as well.
Yeah, yeah, exactly the same process. We do make some amendments to their slides and look at slightly different parameters. The same with our distance learning and English and maths. We set them a slightly different master template, but we still do use the core of the system. So the apprenticeship teams still have that session with you, Ben, and still look at what jobs and careers are out there. But that's when, right at the start, I talked about, you know, reflecting on what you know about the sector as well. So we don't just look at EMSI and say, oh, we definitely need to put that on. We then pair that with our employer engagement boards. What are they telling us? What are our employer surveys saying? What is the national picture? What are our LEPs telling us that they need? So it is about when they use EMSI, and that's one of their starting points, but they present 2 or 3 different lots of information to us, and they bring that together to make that informed decision. I also think our curriculum managers do own our curriculum, because they're the ones responsible for going out and looking at what it is. You know, of course, we still have a look at what's happening at other colleges, what's on their websites. So it is very much about bringing all of that information together to interpret the data and make informed decisions.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think you touched upon a really good point, which is, I think, you know, the adult piece has moved, hasn't it, a lot, particularly around devolution and obviously the challenge that I think colleges get now, particularly around what you're spending that AEB on, and how do you know that it's having impact, and ultimately how do you know that employers want those skills. And at the minute we've got a bit of a hodgepodge, haven't we? We've got SDF, or we've got LSIP. I think SDF's opening back up again, isn't it, for people to apply to. But I think the fact that you've built that window in for people to sort of come to you and review that offer, I think puts you in a really good position, doesn't it, when you're having those difficult conversations or challenging conversations sometimes with local authority partners, maybe.
Definitely. I mean, one of the things we've certainly used it for and been successful in as well is applying for our flexibilities, the West Midlands Combined Authority. So, you know, we can look at the job demand, we can show them what skills are needed and how that would apply to the curriculum in order to get that flexibility. So we certainly use it as part of that as well, or if we're putting in You know, that there are a range of bids that come out, aren't they? But anything that we put in for, really, we use it as our source data and find that very supportive, because when somebody's got hard facts to work on, they feel a little bit more comfortable supporting a project. Whereas when it we're talking about we think there is a need for, then we don't get that same level of buy-in.
And then in terms of planning, obviously you start really early, don't you, in terms of planning? And is that really, do you think that's really important, particularly around that 16 to 18 piece as well, but adult piece, in terms of getting ahead of the games? Because I think you are starting really early this year, aren't you, if memory serves?
We're starting June this year for September 2023. I think more so for the 16 to 18 curriculum. I think I alluded to at the start of the presentation, in previous years, you know, 3 years ago, we were looking at that in September and October. By the time we decided and validated it was Christmas, and actually we missed the entire window, because we start interviewing our learners from October, and our open days launch in October. So we very much like our offer on the table from the start of October, so we can start talking to learners about it. In terms of adults, obviously early planning is important, but I think continuous planning is important for adults. You know, every few weeks reflecting on what's happening in the industry, and, you know, as a local company closed down, how's that affected the job postings. So I think early planning is really crucial, even more so for 16 to 18s, because generally it's those academic learners that are, you know, aspirational, that turn up to us in October. And if the offer isn't there and we can't talk about it and talk about what pathways we're doing and what modules we're doing, and, you know, start to think about what employers are we going to engage with, and where they're going to do work experience, there's an awful lot to plan, isn't there? So if you haven't given yourself that lead-in time, you're preparing to fail, really.
No, absolutely, and I think it's fascinating to hear such a structured approach, and yeah, I'm sure people have found it really, really interesting. We've had a few questions that have come through about, can we get a copy of the recording? Can we get in touch with obviously yourself, and I'm sure, you know, I'm sure you'll be fine with people reaching out. And obviously what we will be doing is sharing a copy of the slides and the session from today for everybody that couldn't attend or have attended. And I think a couple of people have had some sound issues, which does tend to happen in the world of online working, doesn't it? The final bit from me, and before we sign off, I mean, firstly, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Karen. I know how super busy you are. I think everyone's probably seen how super busy you are in terms of the amazing job that you do in terms of leading planning. But I really appreciate you taking the time out, putting this presentation together and sharing your story. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Ben.
And then the final bit from me would just be just a reminder to people that we've got a series of webinars coming up around levelling up. So the first one takes place next week, where I'll be joined by Will and Richard, our two other sector leaders, our two other directors for communities and governments and HE. And we're going to be doing a series of webinars throughout the next couple of months, looking at the levelling up agenda. I know there's been some stuff fresh out of the budget today around that, particularly around the levy. I think there's some work being done on the levy by the sounds of it. I didn't catch it all. So please feel free to register for those webinars and obviously reach out to us. Just want to say thank you again to Karen, an amazing presentation, and obviously an amazing piece of work that the college does. So thank you, Karen, and thanks everyone for joining us. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thanks.